So the dismissive avoidant attachment style.
Now, I think that avoidant attachment is the most misrepresented type in the media.
Avoidant personality disorder.
But it is that feeling of something is wrong with me, and if anyone gets too close, they will find out.
You gaslighted me! You're a fucking villain!
Why didn't cheat on you?
I didn't ask.
I'm just saying.
I didn't ask.
Well, I'm just saying.
I didn't ask.
You get to be the same while I'm stuck here fighting these wars all by myself! What? Show up for me, like. Show up for me!
My avoidant attachment style is actually birthed from a fear of intimacy. And it's not my fault. It's actually the women's fault that I've been dating. I like that. I like that a lot.
Oh, I see. It's already started. I'm sorry. The gaslighting session, it's already started. So you're gaslighting me into thinking that I signed up for the wrong session.
Okay, guys. So before we get into this episode, I'm going to need you to do me one little favor if you haven't done it already. And that's like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you haven't subscribed already, it's very important for growing this channel. And as you can probably tell, my viewership and my subscription rate are dramatically far apart. About 90% of my viewers do not and are not subscribed. So please don't let that be you. I know it might be a bit ridiculous. Some of you might be the first time here and you'll be like, I don't know if I fuck with you like that. But subscribe and find out. You can always unsubscribe, please don't, but you can. Also, on top of that, if you're someone who watches it regularly but don't see the point of subscribing because for the simple fact it comes up on your suggested, I get it, but YouTube likes subscriptions. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Today we are discussing relationships. What are relationships and male avoidance? Why are men avoidant in relationships? Is it all the women's fault? Is it? I think so.
Please stop gaslighting me.
I'm not gaslighting you.
I'm just joking, kind of. However, we're going to discuss relationships and how men are avoidant and why men are avoidant. What are those roles and the contributing factors that allow them to be avoidant. Also, on top of that, let's be real, we're going to also discuss the history of it a little bit. How men became that in the first place. And let's start with this. Take said example, boy child. Boy child is about 3 to 5 years old. Boy child's running around the house. Boy child is uncontrollable, filled with testosterone, fighting adventures that he doesn't fully understand, trying to save the planet. I've got a bit carried away with that, but bear with me. Boy child falls over, cuts his knee, starts crying. Caregiver, parent, dad, mom, whoever, comes up to him and says, typically, stop crying. Why are you crying? Boys don't cry. As opposed to, girl child does the same thing. Similar story, running around like a headless chicken, having fun, being a child, falls over. What's the typical response? What's wrong? Why are you crying? Is everything okay? See, those two polarizing reactions to pain, although physical, becomes the benchmark and the understanding of how boys and children internalize their emotions. When they're not given the space to understand the feelings in which they have, they will start to what? Bury them to the surface. Believe and start to see that emotional pain, and in some cases even physical pain, is something that isn't respected, isn't wanted from them as a male. I want you to take this example. I'm going to play a clip from Andrew Tate where he discusses a story someone gives him about a breakup, and this is his advice to that person. So take this out and we're going to do a comparison.
My ex-girlfriend and me had been dating for 7 months and we had a pretty good relationship, but one night she went out to party without me and I didn't think anything of it until my phone started blowing up with texts from her mates saying that she was going home with her ex-boyfriend. I questioned her about it, but she denied it, so I broke up with her because her friends had sent me the proof and other fellas had told me they were hooking up. So out of the bitterness of my heart, I fucked her cousin. Me and her cousin had been pretty close close friends with benefits. My ex came running back to me when she found out I was in love with her, and I don't know what I should do. Should I get back with my ex or continue to fuck the cousin?
I'm going to answer the first question that appears. The first question that appeared from me was, why is your chick going out without you?
What if it was like a girl's night?
Understood. So if a girl's night happens and my chick were to go out, she would message me 10, 15 times throughout the night. I'd pick her up, she'd be home. So the fact that your chick went out for a night out and vanished for the night is already a massive warning sign. If she ever does that once without being told, then you should be able to say to her, look, I'm uncomfortable you going on nights out and staying somewhere without telling me. I want to know where you are from now on. Why? You're insecure. I'm not insecure. I'm a man. If anything ever happened to you, you'd call me. I like to know where you are. You should tell me. If she goes, fuck you, I won't ever tell you where I am, do you have control of that relationship? No. Responsibility and authority are linked. The reason the captain of the ship goes down with the ship is because he has responsibility for the ship. If he says, man the sails, people man the sails. If he says, man the sails, and everyone ignores him, how can he be held responsible? If you want me to protect you, if you want to come to me with all of your problems, then I need authority over you. How can I allow myself to fix all your problems when I have no authority to prevent problems in the first place? That's the first thing. Second thing, women don't sleep with men they don't really like. Even if it's a one-night stand, to some degree she likes you. So whoever she's fucked, she likes to some degree. She might want your attention back, and that's why she's pretending to give a shit to get your attention back. But you have to have a bottom line as a man.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. I'm not the biggest fan of Andrew Tate at all. However, I think that clip there, he's at his kind of his best, if I'm being honest. But that's not why I put the clip there. I wanted you just to see how he articulates his advice to a breakup. And that will shape a lot of your understanding and a backdrop of how men kind of deal with emotions. First of all, look how he discussed the cheating. Look at the male's response to cheating. He was very solution-based, focusing on the control, the lack of control you had over the situation. And one thing I will say just in response to that clip itself is that people don't cheat because they go out. People don't cheat because they were given quote unquote too much freedom. People cheat for a number of reasons, and some can be due to an innate emptiness inside of them, which was maybe triggered by your behavior, maybe that it was always there. I think that's perhaps a more better way of looking at it. And although his advice did have accountability about his actions and how to had tangible steps going forward, notice that there was not a lot of understanding about emotions and sitting with emotions. And I'm going to play you this clip about someone discussing a breakup, similar-ish regarding cheating. Well, moving on, I should say. And we'll discuss after that.
So you've broken up with your ex. They've moved on to somebody else. You're sitting there fuming. They're happy as Larry and you are so miserable. You are literally eaten up with jealousy, anxiety, self-doubt, wondering how the hell have they moved on from me so fast? Well, if that's the case, then let me just explain something to you. Because no relationship in the world has broken up because it was so great. I need you to sit and think about all the bad things that your ex done, the things about your relationship that were not so perfect, and don't be telling me, oh, everything was wonderful and perfect, because that's not the case. Take off the rose-coloured glasses. Be honest about the relationship that you were actually in, not the one that you imagined in your mind. Now, let's switch it and reverse it, because your ex's new partner is now in that relationship that you were in, with all those bad points, all those annoying points. And they're with somebody who can walk away.
Now you can start to see the difference in how males discuss situations and breakups and how women discuss situations and breakup. First of all, that situation is quite ambiguous. At no point will you understand if that was a male or a female that she was talking about. Secondly, look at the focus that she had on sitting with those uncomfortable emotions, sitting with the reality of the situation, trying to waken you up, or the person, to the uncomfortableness of what that relationship was or wasn't. I think secondly, that's quite important to say, is that Andrew Tate, although he was quite forthcoming and honest, and sometimes maybe he came across as harsh, he never negated the accountability, but there was far more focus in that second video by that lady about the uncomfortable reality of the feelings that you are dealing with. I bet she was talking about to a woman. However, it was very ambiguous, and I find it kind of interesting that it's so negated how it's so negated from the reality of how we discuss male and females, about how different we view emotions. Men, when they feel an emotion, view it as a problem that needs solving. Even the way Andrew spoke about it, it was like this a part of the situation led to this part of an outcome. And you'll find that in the manosphere a lot. You let her go out, she's gonna cheat. While that was more understanding, what were the red flags in the relationship? What were things that you ignored? How about we stop fantasizing in our head the relationships that we want and look at the reality of what they were giving us? It was far more emotive. However, this couples back to my point earlier, that neurological wiring that many of us young males felt, where when you felt an emotion, it was a problem to be solved, number one. It was an issue that needed to be either solved or avoided, number two. And sitting with emotions was not something that we were stereotypically comfortable or understood how to fully do. What could that potentially lead to? And it's this concept of...
Another thing that I'd recommend is that y'all check out this idea of normative male alexithymia, which is this idea that men are, by default, it's normative, so it's like most men are colorblind to their internal emotional state. And alexithymia is also a culprit for problems in relationships. So what we tend to find is that when we don't understand what we're feeling, it creates all kinds of stresses in relationships. We start to send mixed signals because someone asks us, hey, is it okay if I, go to this party without you? And you're like, yeah, it's fine, like whatever. And then you kind of feel resentful, but you don't know how to vocalize that resentment. You feel ashamed for feeling that resentment. And so as a result, it kind of sabotages your relationship because you said it was okay, but now you're punishing this person for something that you gave them permission for. So alexithymia has been associated with all these kinds of things.
Normative alexithymia. Now, I hope that clip provided you with some sort of understanding of what alexithymia was. I guess the analogy of colorblindness could help. I think another analogy to understand alexithymia or normative alexithymia from the Healthy Gamer doctor. He is a trained psychologist or psychiatrist.
You haven't got a clue.
He is trained in what the fuck he does. However, normative alexithymia, I think the best way to describe it, other than the colorblind analogy that he used, is to understand this is when you're hungry, you can feel it in your stomach. Your mind is sending you signals. You're imagining what you can eat. You're becoming frustrated. You're becoming irritated. Alexithymia in this instant would be, you wouldn't understand how you feel. You don't understand that you're hungry. You don't understand these signals. You have ideas of eating food, but you don't know what that means. Just imagine that for emotions, not being able to describe your emotions. Similar to what the clip was saying, someone's asking you how you're feeling, and you say stuff like, I don't know, I feel like you're using descriptive word. You try to use analogies to describe how you feel, but you can't tangibly place, I feel frustrated and tired due to the continuous cycle of this situation. I feel unworthy of love, so I continually self-sabotage in order to avoid uncomfortable feelings of being let down, blah, 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 blah. That can explain alexithymia. And a lot of men, due to, like I said earlier, about being quickly as a man, feeling as if that your emotions are a negative. Being emotional is negative and is made to make you feel less than as a man, can lead to normative alexithymia being developed. It's also something that's very common with people who have autism, and I think it would become exacerbated in males that have autism as well. I think another aspect of avoidance in male that doesn't get discovered is the role of their caregiver, the role of their parent, and the history of their parent. Now, if you're someone from the Black community, you may view your parent as potentially emotionally unavailable. Someone who was emotionally quite cold is another descriptive word that people use to describe emotional unavailability. And that can be passed down, not just psychologically through your environment, but biologically.
Future generations too. For example, in a study of 100 Holocaust survivors, researchers found that their children were more likely to get a PTSD diagnosis, even though they didn't report any more traumatic experience in their lives than a similar control group did. What they did get was stories from their parents, really distressing stories. And hearing about threats to your family, even in the past, can be traumatic on its own. But that might not be the only explanation. Trauma could also be inherited biologically, sort of like what gets passed on through our genes. And since a big part of understanding people is knowing about the different factors that can affect their thought processes and behaviors, psychologists want to figure out how this works. So far, we do have some evidence that trauma can be passed biologically from one generation to the next, part of the field of epigenetics, the study of what can be inherited or passed on from parent to child biologically, but outside of the actual letters of your DNA. Since methylation levels can change based on your environment, it's a way things that happen in your life can affect what you pass down. And the researchers found that compared to the control groups, both the Holocaust survivors and their children had higher methylation levels in a gene related to stress response. Previous research showed that gene was related to an increased risk in developing a psychological disorder like PTSD in people who experienced some kind of trauma in their childhood. So the team thought they might have found a biological way for trauma to be inherited through increased methylation that gets passed on.
See, the idea of epigenetic, like he was saying, is that it's hardwired into your DNA, and certain triggers bring this out. And I think something in the Black community that isn't discussed enough is the historical impact of slavery. Now, typically, a lot of research about epigenetics is done on Holocaust victims and the trauma and the PTSD, how that can be passed down. However, I'm not trying to do oppression Olympics, but what happened during slavery was one of the worst massacres and worst tragedies that has ever happened to a community. And I think that typically what you'll find with males who are from the Black community, they've had to numb their emotions so much because they were powerless. There was nothing they could do. Their emotions, their tears were not recognized as something that women can, in the Black community, can also fully understand, that their emotions and their tears are not recognized. And you can imagine that for a male, that there is no place for them to discuss their emotions. So they numb themselves very quickly. And that numbing, that avoidance of pain and emotion passes down. If you look at a lot of the data about people who are last to engage with, whether that be the medical health system, it typically is the Black males. Now, I know some of it's to do with finances, but a large part of it is to do as well the acceptance of pain, the acceptance that they need help. It's not something very common in the Black community due to pain. Accepting that they need help is seen, when you're hypermasculized, as a form of weakness. And for a lot of men, they'd rather be dead than weak, or viewed as weak, I should say. And that can be passed down through epigenetics, and especially if you come from a community that has been traumatized. And let's be real, in the Black community, it is very fucking traumatized. So I think that's another aspect to understand the avoidance of males. It's an inherited trauma. It's a unfortunate badge that comes with a lot of males, and is sometimes reverberated in their direct household, not just in their DNA as well. However, a lot of women and a lot of people seeing this may view this as, you're explaining it, but do the work, do better, improve.
Stop crying, it won't do any good. And anyway, you have a lot of work to do, starting right now.
And I would say this, there's several issues that come with doing the work, and why it's so difficult for men to become more emotionally intelligent, why it's so difficult for men to become more emotionally available and less avoidant. And issue one is,
so we have to start by understanding where this idea that talk therapy is the gold standard for treating mental illness comes from. So what we really need to understand is that the majority of patients in the history of psychotherapy have been women. About 60 to 70% of patients today who engage in psychotherapy are women. The other thing is that about 60 to 70% of therapists today are actually women. So I think what happened early on in psychiatry or psychotherapy is that the majority of people we were helping were women. And so when me as a doctor, when I look at 10 of my patients and I see, okay, so it looks like talking to people about their feelings on average is the most successful thing that I can do. But even though that's factually correct, I may not be taking into account that 7 out of those 10 people are women. And maybe the people who are getting helped the most with talk therapy or talking about their emotions are actually women. And it's not just me that says this. If you actually look at the American Psychological Association's guidance for working with boys and men. They sort of point out a systemic bias in the way that we diagnose men and women. And that's a lot of the diagnoses that women get, like depression and anxiety, which, by the way, women are about 2 to 3 times as likely to be diagnosed with that stuff. A lot of those diagnoses have to do with feelings and being able to articulate stuff. So, for example, major depressive disorder involves feeling sad when you're depressed, right? Makes sense. And that a lot of men are actually diagnosed with what we call externalizing disorders. Things like addictions or sociopathy or antisocial personality disorder. So these are disorders that involve behaviors. So I think they're sort of cluing us in on a really important idea, which is that when men feel something, they act on it as opposed to articulate it or talk about it.
Therapy has a systemic and historical bias against males, especially Black ethnic minority males. Number one is that a lot of the studies that surround therapy and talk therapy being the best method in helping people through their mental well-being and their mental health struggles is based off studies that involve women. A lot of the practitioners are women. If you look at the demographic of practitioners in the US, UK, and all over the Western world, it's typically white, middle-class women as well, which can be extremely alienating for men. There is a growing trend of Black women engaging in psychology and being practitioners in psychology as well. But still, the Black males in psychology is a very low percentage. Males in general in psychology is extremely low. Now, some of that is to do with the potential earnings that comes from going down this career path. And I'm not going to lie, in this cosy living life that we're living in, this crisis of finances that we're living in, I can understand that and relate to that, but it does create a barrier from that engagement. Second issue.
Do girls like bad boys?
Yes.
Yes, I think absolutely.
Yeah. Yes. I think a majority of girls do like bad boys.
I think it depends.
I mean, I love bad boys.
You like good boys?
No, I don't.
Yeah, you do.
Some do, but some don't.
You'd like to think that the good guy always wins, but that's not often the case.
I think that women are attracted to men who turn out to be jerks. I don't know if they go looking for bad boys.
I like the idea.
Yeah.
It's kind of reinforced by women. Let's not lie, a lot of women at a younger age as well will engage, and the media pushes this as well, the bad boy stereotype, the not the nice guy. The not the nice guy. Is that grammatical English?
Did you see that jerk?
That's not grammatical English, boy. Damn. The bad boy stereotypically is what I'm saying. The guy that was cold. And the media pushes this. And there's an article. The article that's on screen right now discusses the issues with the media's portrayal of the bad boy, talking about how it's become a pop culture archetype of presenting masculinity towards males and females. It's reinforced through music, it's reinforced through different celebrity figures like Justin Bieber, Conor McGregor. It's reinforced through graphic novels as well, like, for example, 50 Shades of Grey, The Bad Boy Next Door, Bridget Jones's Diary, etc, etc, etc. TV shows as well, like Gossip Girl, Sons of Anarchy. It is presented throughout our media constantly, the bad boy stereotype. And this quote from it really describes the bad boy stereotype and its problems, and why a lot of men probably struggle with their understanding of what a bad boy is and isn't. And it says, to summarize really, taken too far, the juvenile masculinity can become toxic, similarly appealing to more manipulative traits. Again, these complexities and these lack of understanding is discussed in the conclusion at the end. Discusses the bad boy a man-child or a master manipulator? Is the bad boy a fearless trailblazer or a stubborn brat? Is the bad boy a supreme lover or a compulsive womanizer? You see, there's a lack of understanding of what the bad boy is, and I'll put this on screen as well from the article. There's so many different descriptions of what the bad boy is, and women often end up rewarding guys that fit into these more archetypes of what the bad boy is, whether he's a womanizer, confident, rude, appearing cold and wanting to understand him, and the coldness being associated with mystery. And often we don't, although some bad boys have sensitivity and emotional intelligence, it's not often the main point of focus that the bad boy has the emotional complexities to understand his emotions and their partner's emotions. And it takes women growing up and being hurt a few times before they understand that they want someone who's emotionally intelligent. And by then, typically, it's been reinforced in many men's head that being emotional and being emotionally intelligent is something of a negative. It's something that doesn't bring in not only women's validation, but male validation as well. And I think why the bad boy archetype is so popular and has gained so much traction is because typically, and if you look at those traits off the face of it, they're not bad, but like the article said, they can become complex and twisted into manipulative traits. They can stem into one thing. You could be good and confident with women and fall into becoming a womanizer. It can become very skewed sometimes, and the lines can become blurred between good and bad. And again, like I was trying to say earlier, and I heard this from Pearl Davis, that the hero and the villain have similar traits. And that's why the bad boy archetype is so appealing, because at the face of it, you can't quite tell, is he the good guy or the bad guy? And you'll find that even older women who have understood and matured from the bad boy archetype and have been hurt a few times and understand that they need someone who's more emotionally intelligent will still want some of those quote unquote bad boy tendencies, whether that's the confidence, the directness, the charisma. They will still want that in the quote unquote nice guy.
Women wanting bad boys is that oftentimes the bad boys are very confident. They're very charismatic in the beginning. They make that great impression right off the bat, but then there's nothing long lasting. And so it's really about when women grow up and we mature, we start to like men who have that confidence but have all the great values behind it.
And I think I'll just add this about the nice guy. It's not that being nice is viewed as weak, it's that a part of it is that sometimes the nice guy doesn't trigger those negative emotions that they're used to associating with love and their caregiver. Secondly, some nice guys can come across as weak and not a protector of that woman as well. And again, like I was saying, the hero and the villain, they both have protective instincts. They both have directness. They both have confidence. They both are good with people, typically. And I think that's the complexity of understanding the bad boy archetype. And you even find it in the Marvel and the DC movies that the villain and the hero often mirror each other. And I think that's the issue. That's one of the biggest issues with trying to change the narrative about masculinity and what it is about masculinity, is that quite often we reinforce perhaps the most manipulative and I would like to call it the shiny part of masculinity and not the depth, not the complexities, not the emotional intelligence, not the inner turmoil that they have to overcome.
That having a father wound really messes with your self-esteem and your sense of worthiness, right? If I was worthy, my father wouldn't have been checked out. And since my own father was very successful and achievement was important to him, I knew that that was a way to get positive reinforcement. So I was very ambitious. I was ambitious in school, but then I became very ambitious in my career because then we had sort of that in common. But I was always seeking his approval and not feeling like I measured up, right? So, and what did that do to my relationships? Well, I found myself repeatedly being attracted to men who were unavailable, very similar to my father. And once I had a lot of therapy and thought that I had figured it out, where now I was with men who were very emotional and talked and were amazing. And then my therapist points out, she's like, Tara, yeah, your boyfriend is all of those things, but he lives in Greece. So it was the same thing. Once I found them, they could be emotionally present, I made sure it was with someone who was on another continent. So the same exact pattern was still playing out, which is extremely painful. But obviously, I spent a bunch of time in my life healing my own father wound. And I know that many of you have father wounds. If you have an inkling that you have a father wound, trust me, you probably do. And it doesn't have to be super extreme. right? It doesn't have to be extreme abuse for you to actually sustain a father wound that could be playing out in your relationships right now.
See, I placed this video here from Teria Cole. Is to provide a kind of understanding, a kind of timeline of healing, number one. I mean, she was on her healing journey and was still picking men that were somewhat unavailable to her. And I think it's important to look at, if you're a woman or even a male and trying to understand women as well, what was your relationship with your primary caregiver? If you had a father that was emotionally or physically absent, you're typically going to choose a partner that is emotionally and physically absent. One of the two. And even as you go on your healing journey, you might find clever ways, like Teria did, to still look for that absenceness, if that's a word. It is now. It's because your relationship with love is, in the case of father wounds for women, is chasing, seeking, and then being available doesn't trigger that emotional feelings, and it takes a great deal of work to understand that chasing for love isn't a healthy form of love. And on top of that, it makes people believe because they chase for love and they can dump their traumas on people that they themselves are emotionally intelligent. Well, you may be comfortable with vulnerability, but you do it out of fear. And that can create negative relationships with partners who see that you use your trauma and your vulnerability to force a connection as opposed to a space to try and better understand each other. That's something that is important to understand with father wounds and the absent father relationships in women. However, sadly, trauma loves a friend. And you may pick out a partner, especially if you're from a community where broken homes are sadly a bit more common for a number of reasons, but a bit more common. You may pick up a partner that has a father wound. And now this article really describes what father wounds does to sons and boys. So the article on screen by Bob Pears, Beyond the Father Wound, Memory Work and Deconstruction of Father-Son Relationships, discusses the importance and the power of a father-son relationship and the destructive nature of not having a father in your life. And to summarize what he says, it can be the most damaging for a boy to not have a father in his life, and it creates a deep absence and a wound inside them. The article argues that the son will have troubles identifying and understanding their own masculinity and will have struggles in their advancement through adulthood. The feminists also write and add to this article that men who don't have involvement in their son's life risk the fact that the sons can potentially become more violent, whether that's emotionally and physically, towards women, also through their distance. They will also have struggles with creating their own gender identity, and this can lead to them having emotional distance in themselves, lower self-esteem, greater insecurities about their masculinity, hence why it could render them more likely to be violent towards women. Now, I don't necessarily agree that having an absent father will equate and equals violence towards women, but I do understand, I can heavily empathize with the understanding that you will struggle with your masculinity, in the sense that shaping it can be quite difficult. Me, myself, I didn't grow up with my dad around that much at all, and by the time I became a teenager, he was as absent as Casper the Ghost, but he wasn't very friendly.
So,
what a dark joke to make about my dad not being around. That's kind of mad. Anyway, he wasn't, so what can I do? You do have troubles understanding your masculinity, and as men, we look to older men to kind of understand, how do you be a man? And I look to guys who went to jail for 16 years as my idea of masculinity. And as I said earlier, you can look to TV shows and this idea that's pushed upon you, and because you're quite young, it's the images and that media pushes about what masculinity is and isn't is very impressionable towards a young male. And without a father around, you kind of cling on to these false and very thin ideas of what manhood is, and it can lead to, again, clinging on to maybe trying to be confident, trying to be charismatic, and end up becoming very manipulative because you don't know how that looks in a fully fledged man consistently. You may struggle to have long-term relationships because it's not something that you may be used to There's a lot of things that can happen to males when they don't have relationships with their own fathers. Also, and it's important to say, that will lead them to being avoidant. Some men who do have relationship with their fathers, but the fathers themselves are also emotionally distanced, will also feel and have some of these struggles as well. Without men being in men's lives, how do they navigate the complex world of emotions and boys' emotions? Women do a great job because they, at some point, males look at their women as someone as they should protect, not be seeking help from. And that's why they typically turn to sometimes not the best of role models, and there's never a great role model. No role model is perfect. However, this article really highlights the gap and the hole that is left in males when they don't have a father around, and it can lead to avoidance. The article also discusses that these things can be passed down, and the males that abandon their children, typically that's due to their own avoidance, their own inherited trauma. And I wish there was a bit more of a discussion about this inherited trauma that's come down from different generations, whether that's in the Black community and slavery, the avoidance of pain and running away from difficult situations and abandoning men. I wish that was discussed a little bit more, and how that can be passed down continuously without doing the real tangible work. But no conversation would be complete without understanding the mother wound, especially in men.
We know about a father wound. What we don't know about is a mother wound. And I want to talk about it for a minute. A mother wound is trauma that your mom dealt with that she never got healed from, and she passed it on to her kids. If you had a mom that was emotionally unsupportive, highly critical, or had low self-esteem, you pick some of that up. How your mom felt about herself, how she dealt with relationships, even what she believed becomes ingrained in you, and you maybe don't even know it. Maybe your mom, now listen, this is gonna be a little challenging for some of us to walk through, but I want you to think about this. Maybe your mom looked to you and your brother or sister to meet her emotional needs, to solve her problems, or maybe she attempted to live her life through you. Maybe mom kept you home from school because she was having a bad day. Maybe you became your mom's best friend whenever you were young, and instead of being a mother, she wanted to be a friend to you. She wanted to hang out. Maybe she talked about your dad to you, and you became a counselor between mom and dad. That's a mother wound. And what happens in your life is that causes you to be a fixer, a rescuer, or an enabler. And you may not even realize that you're that.
See, the importance of understanding the mother wound in terms of women as well is that maybe that's why you look for and find broken men, because from an early age you were a fixer of your mother's problems and you had a codependency relationship. Your relationships could be codependent due to that. It can lead to chronic insecurities, chronic self-judgment, also engaging in unhealthy patterns of self-soothing. And that can also lead to avoidance as well. Typically, people with avoidance styles can.
So layer one for the avoidant attachment style of why they fear intimacy is actually about self-regulation. So using an avoidant attachment strategy means that you over-rely on self-regulation and under-rely on co-regulation. And what that means is that you don't necessarily turn to other people to process your emotions, to help you feel better when you're struggling with something. Instead, you turn to routines, things, activities, whatever it is you can think of that can help you change your mood without having to disclose to another person what's going on with you. But this doesn't happen quite the way that it sounds like it might happen, and this is a really common misconception. So people tend to think of someone using an avoidant attachment strategy as someone using an anxious strategy who's just like white knuckling it through their need to talk to other people and connect. But because avoidantly attached people learned so long ago not to co-regulate, it doesn't actually occur to them to do that, okay? It's not like they have a feeling that arises in their mind of being upset or whatever it is, and they think, I could call my friend, but I'd rather not. I'd rather just be strong and get through it myself, right? That's actually more similar to how an anxious or fearful avoidant person would process a difficult emotion that they want to learn to self-regulate through. For the avoidant attachment style, they have set up their entire lives around being able to keep themselves emotionally stable without even consciously realizing that they're doing that. And what the avoidant doesn't realize they're processing is the idea that because they have emotions, because they have needs and weaknesses and vulnerabilities, they have shame at their absolute core around that deep knowing, right? They don't realize that every single person also has those things, and that securely attached people don't have that shame at their core around the fact that they have needs and that they do need to rely on other people. We all do. So level 3 of intimacy fearing for the avoidantly attached person, and this is deeply unconscious, so they will not be able to tell you this. If you ask an avoidantly attached person if they feel this, unless they have been doing work on their attachment style, they're probably going to tell you absolutely not. But it is that feeling of something is wrong with me, and if anyone gets too close, they will find out.
As that video said, have unhealthy patterns with self-soothing. Well, not unhealthy, but are far too rigid with their unhealthy patterns of self-soothing. And I think for males, their unhealthy patterns of self-soothing and their also the need for validation and validation seeking can be birthed from a mother wound, as they still crave the validation and attention from women, but they may go about it in a not so healthy way, where they are, instead of being satisfied with the attention of one woman, they need several women to fill the void and the black hole that's inside them to fulfill those wounds and that mother wound that they never quite were fulfilled when they were younger. It can be birthed from abandonment, it can be birthed from neglect, it can be birthed in many, many different ways, and it may be difficult to even identify it because our relationship with mothers as a concept is that our mothers were perfect, but they couldn't be. They were born in an imperfect world and they were gonna make mistakes, and as a child and as an adolescent we may have not realized that we internalize neglect in so many different ways. Me, as someone who can be quite avoidant, I had like deep self-soothing tactics in terms of I had a very rigid routine in how I dealt with my morning, which I found actually when I was in relationships, I didn't like spending the morning with people because I felt like they were interrupting my me time. And that was something I developed from an element of abandonment. I never want to say my mom abandoned me, but there was an element of neglect and being by myself for so long that I ended up finding ways to comfort me. And that made me somewhat very emotionally avoidant. It seemed like I was being difficult. It seemed like I was being distant. However, it was a way to self-soothe, and it's very easy. And as people who watch this video, you may even comment, and you can leave in the comments this as well, that if I just love them enough, that can make them less avoidant. Not so much. You do have to. There needs to be an internal shift in the avoidant person, that they've had enough of fearing and running from intimacy. And it's important for that to be discussed as well. And I think for women as well, who maybe have a mother wound, you will typically go through cycles of codependency, trying to fix people, being a fixer. And that can lead you to be an enabler, a victim at times, or an abuser. It really depends. It's a 360 thing. And I just want to say this before I close the episode, that there is hope for males that are avoidant, women that are avoidant. If you're with a partner that is anxiously avoidant as well, that as soon as you recognize that and recognize that fear and the shame of being vulnerable, of being scared. Someone myself, I have tremendous fear about being viewed as weak, being vulnerable. And I remember sitting down one time and telling myself, why am I so scared to just admit sometimes I've been hurt? And it was birthed out of the hurt, someone using that hurt to hurt me being viewed as someone who needed help, because I was always the helper, I was always the fixer, I was always the person that looked for people to fix. And I was like, being viewed as that person made me feel weak, and I didn't like that. Being viewed as weak made me feel the type of way. You know, look at me. Look at that body language, that closed body language. But you can see, feeling weak was something I didn't associate with myself. I didn't like to associate myself. And feeling that pity and that emotional and feeling people's empathy was something that scared me. However, if you open up your heart to intimacy and to love, it requires vulnerability. It requires stepping into brave new territory that you have never been before. I do still recommend therapy for men, but I think for men, you will need to try and error a few. Men, if you are watching this and you're thinking about therapy, I would recommend highly asking a therapist to be more proactive. Therapists can typically sit there and say, how are you feeling? How is everything? And you probably will need someone who's more proactive, a little bit more problem solving. Don't be afraid to say you think you might have alexithymia. Don't be afraid to say that at all. They may say, why do you feel like that? Because I have troubles describing my feelings. Can you help me be a bit more proactive? And if they're not and they're not engaging, fuck them off. Try about 3 or 4 therapists before you close off to the idea completely. And it's important to go in with an open mind and an open heart with therapy. Secondly, for women, look at your own relationships with your caregivers, and that might explain why you've maybe gone through cycles or going through cycles with men that are anxiously avoidant. What's your attachment style? Are you someone who's anxiously attached? Again, the anxiously attached will always find the anxiously avoidant. The clingy goes with the distant every single time. And I will say this as well, for my own community, black men, black women as well, a lot of our trauma has been inherited down, and it was triggered from a very young age, and we developed coping mechanisms to navigate it and understand it. And I think having open discussions about it, trying to understand them will help. And an easy way to learn to be more comfortable with these open discussions is to have like kind of emotional diaries, thought diaries, journals is something I use to navigate and weave the emotional web that is your mind. Honestly, your emotions can't hurt you, your thoughts can't hurt you. Just learning to become more and more comfortable with that is important. And I think another piece of advice I'll give to a lot of men that are from my community, it's a mistake I used to make a lot as well, is I will never be like my father. I hate my father. Those words, although I understand the sentiment that it comes from, think about it like driving, point of focus. The more you avoid trying to be like someone, the more you end up being like that person in the end. And I think instead of trying to not be like someone, try to create a version of you that you are proud of and is shaped by you, not just the images and the subconscious imprints that live inside you. We're constantly battling, we're constantly going through this journey. And if we don't go through the journeys of trying to understand ourselves, we'll never be fully fulfilled in our intimate or friendship relationships. And with that bombshell, I must call this episode to an end. If you disagree with anything I said, please put into the comments. If you've dealt with someone who's anxiously avoidant and ended up having a healthy relationship with them, discuss in the comments how you did it. If you think this is impossible and if you just have to do the fucking work and I'm chatting shit, then say that, put in the comments. Put into your comments what you'd like me to discuss next as well. I'm excited to hear that. But please, like, comment, share, subscribe. The journey to 1K is on its way. It's really 1 million. My journey is to 1 million, but you know, you got to start with 1,000 apparently. That's what I keep getting told. See you next week. Peace.
Me to see him like that. I love my wife to death. I've done disrespectful and wrong. So to see him feel like that, and I understand, like, you don't want to hurt your other. But sometimes when you come from people don't really get what he's saying. He's in pain. He loves her more than he loves himself.